Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. This is Franz, Sidney speaking to you. I'm very excited today to introduce to you a very, very well-known author, and her name is Alicia Rodriguez. So welcome to the show, Alicia.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
So today we're going to talk about how sometimes we, especially women, we lose our power when we are in a relationship and we then reclaim it. And how this happens, what are the processes, and how can we get it back? And let me just introduce you, Alicia, so you know who are we talking about. So Alicia is a very successful entrepreneur who was recovering in the past from a divorce and from loss. And she accepted a special invitation to go to Ecuador because she wanted to help a friend who was studying with a shaman. But she never realized that this was going to really change her life, because then she met somebody called Napo, and this somebody was not a nobody, was a very powerful shaman, a healer. And so a very extraordinary relationship started between Alicia and Napo, and for 8 years, this relationship went on and deepened, and Alicia learned a lot about shamanism and saw how good he was, healing the people, how amazing. And so she thought, wow, this is so different from a life in the United States, because I remember you were born in Boston. And so she decided, well, I'm going to move to Ecuador. We're going to make an amazing healing center. And this was like a really overwhelming task and very difficult. But there was a point when Alicia realized that all her power and all her agency was surrendered to Napo. This was going to be a problem. There was going to be like a weapon. And so there was this inner struggle, which a lot of women experience nowadays between the 35 and 55. And then eventually Alicia had to dig in, find the courage to leave Ecuador and to move away. She moved to Portugal, in wonderful Portugal, and she found peace. But then what happened is this story that she writes is her memoir. So it's a memoir that triggered lots of memories, and some of them painful, and she had to work for that as well. So we're going to see all the stages of this growth that Alicia went through, and I hope that this will be so helpful for you guys, girls, who are trying to understand who you are and what you want from your life and where you want to go today. And I'm so honored to have you here, Alicia. And I really want to see what happens. So so do you want to explain a little bit how you realize, or do you want to start from just a little bit before, when you arrive in Ecuador with all the excitement, thinking this is my new life? What was going on then?
Well, I had met him and I had spent 2 years going back and forth between the United States and Ecuador. And in that 2 year time frame, we started running retreats before we had our own space. And that's where the idea to build a retreat center came. So we started building while I was still in the United States during that time. And then eventually it was time for me to move to Ecuador and do it full time. So it was a struggle. It was difficult. And it took, I would say, several months before I started recognizing that our relationship was shifting. And the indicators were he was a lot more dominant than he had been. And there was a point in time where I realized, I think I'm in trouble. What have I done?
Yeah, I think I'm in trouble. This sounds, yeah, very. There was a point, the first point when I like check with yourself and things are not quite aligned. Okay.
Right. And I was so busy with the building. You started having arguments. He started getting more in the Latin culture, they called it machismo, more dominant with the machismo. And I was still working online and helping to build the retreat center in terms of the back end of it, the technology and that. And he was doing the operations. But I distinctly remember the day, and that actually became chapter 1 in my memoir, the moment that I realized, what have I done and how the heck am I going to get out of this?
Mm. Yes. I wonder what kind of power he had that he attracted you in and you didn't see where you're gonna fall. Was that the
Oh, I
healing
know.
part?
I asked myself that question. I know the answer now because it took me years to actually find the answer. And the answer was based on something a long time ago. Ever since I was a small girl, I had these abilities that were a little extrasensory, and no one had really explained it to me. And I had a deep connection to nature. I found my church, if you will, in nature, and I had this lifelong longing for understanding how to merge the spiritual and the secular. And then I went through 7 years of loss before I met him, the divorce. My mother had Alzheimer's. I could just go on and on. And when I met him, he said to me, I can teach you how to be more than your grief. I can teach you how to be more than you've ever thought you could. I can teach you how to live in both the spiritual world and the secular world. And that was simply so compelling, given that I had been trying kind of like a quest for my whole life to do exactly that. And here he is right in front of me, a guide who's done it himself. And he's saying, I can teach you how to be more. And that's what got me.
Yes, that is a very good reason for embracing.
Very compelling.
Yeah, and you think, wow, that's the answer. And sometimes, maybe for a period, there was your answer until
Yes.
you realized that your power and your agencies were gone. So, excuse me. Let me just think for a minute, because I've interviewed here Hector, and a Colombian, and he's an immigration lawyer. So same place. And he talked a lot about machismo and how that influenced my family. So how does that influence a woman? Because I know that a lot of my audience is also in Latino countries. So how does that reflect in your relationship? What happens? What's the
Yeah, it's two sides of a coin, and I don't think it's obvious to women at first. The two sides are this. Here comes, even though you're a strong woman, because I'm a strong woman, very confident, but every once in a while, no matter how strong you are, you just want to be able to relax and to let somebody take care of you for a change. And so the positive side is you get a man or a partner who says to you, don't worry, I've got your back. I will support you when you feel like you can't. I will be there for you. And that's the invitation, right? That's what draws you in. It's like, oh, I have someone who is as confident, as powerful as I am, and I can depend on this person. What happens on the dark side of that is that sense of protection becomes possession. That would be what I would say. It moves from protection to possession. And that's the machismo side. That's the side that says, right, I am the one in charge. He actually said to me one day, I'll never forget this. He said, you are not being obedient. And I looked at him, I said, do you remember who I am? do you know who you're talking to? Like, no, of course not. I'm not going to be obedient. and those were the kinds of things that show up in a culture that has this element of machismo. But ironically, in Latin cultures, the women, especially the older women, the grandmothers, yield a lot of power in their families. It's like I always say, don't mess with the abuela, because she's the one who's really running the show. The nona, the abuela. And so it's Latin cultures are like many other cultures, they're complex. It's not everything just as face value.
Yeah, it reflects a little bit how I grew up with I command. My father always said we had to be good. I command here. I was like, okay, I'm getting out of the house as soon as I can. 22 hours gone, because there was no way I was going to be told by somebody what to do. I was not a dog or a 5-year-old. I want to be me. Yeah. And it was so hard. So I realized there was this thing, you want to achieve something, but realize that when the help comes, it comes with a mantle of goodness and empathy, and then becomes possession. I control you. That's very interesting and very painful, I think, for a woman to realize that you are now bound to a person like that. So you became, a different person. You learn, first of all, you had a very difficult time in Ecuador because you have to learn a completely different culture. The life was chaotic. So in the beginning, before you realize even that the relationship was going to be like one-sided power, you had to arrange your life in a different way. And how did you manage that? How did you manage to rest, to rejuvenate yourself?
Yeah, I was lucky in that all my life I've been traveling to different countries and I've lived in different countries. So my ability to adapt to a different culture is probably better than most people. Also, my family is from Colombia, which is Ecuador's neighbor.
Mm.
And so I already spoke the language. I had a head start in terms of what I knew about the culture because it was a Latin American culture, and that's what I grew up in my family. So
Okay.
that was a start. What what was difficult was trying to maintain my sense of self and my sense of power in an environment that I am an outsider. I'm not Ecuadorian, and every culture, even every area of a like in my case, we lived in Manabi, which is the coast. The culture in the coast is very different than the culture in Quito, in the city, in an urban environment. And so it was a lot of my kind of navigating the mores, the social and cultural norms. And I have to admit, he did help me a lot with that. He would say, don't say this because they'll interpret it like that, or don't do this because it will show, they will think that you mean this. And so it was, in a way, it was learning not Spanish, because I knew Spanish, but it was learning the cultural language that was
Yeah.
there. And I'm lucky that I'm very adaptable. I moved to Portugal without speaking the language, without knowing a soul, and I love it here. And my life is just the best ever. And as we were saying earlier, I even know Portuguese now. So
Yeah, tudo bem.
tudo bem.
Tudo bem, tudo bem. So that's a very good asset to have, obviously, to be able to morph yourself into what is needed to be so you can survive and even appreciate the local culture, which can be for anyone because most people don't get married to somebody in the same town. They're moving somewhere, they have to adjust. Look at me
Yeah.
moving from Italy. 30 years ago, I moved to England. And then after 28 years, here I am in the United States. It's been like a whole month now. The culture, the English is different. They call it American here. So it's
Yes.
trousers, pants, suspenders. It's all complicated. All the name of everything, the chips, the crisps. It's all these little things that you think, what are you guys talking about? So you have to really immerse yourself and learn. So that's exciting and inspiring. So you managed to do that, and that was fine. But then there was a point where you decided even to build a healing center. So very exciting activity to do. But you had your vision and you had a purpose, and it was always very clear to you. How did you manage that? Because I would have thought it was overwhelming.
It was overwhelming in many ways. He handled the operations and the actual building of it. And I was the one who kept saying, this is the reason that we're doing it. This is the purpose that we're designing it this way. And so I think it took an extreme focus on what the dream was. And the dream, we called it Quinta Oasis. And oasis, we chose that word because oasis is what you look for when you're thirsting for something. And if you look at, you
Mhm.
hear the thing, oasis in the desert. In a way, we recognize that the world was thirsting for a spiritual life and a spiritual connection. And what we were offering there was the ability to come and work with us to reconnect to that spirituality that is innate in all of us. And that was the oasis. So I focused very much on, this is the reason, this is the purpose that we're doing this. And when it got really difficult, I just went right back to that purpose.
Yes. So focus is a number one thing to keep. Remember, what's your purpose here? Amazing. So focus, maybe you write it down and every day meditate about it. Everyone will have, maybe a vision board, whatever it is that keeps you focused. So focus is a very important thing. Yet there was a point when you realized that actually you love writing. And but you were very dedicated to this shamanic life or whatever. So you have to kind of establish a boundary on when and the balance between how much time you're going to devote to one and to the other. So you have a wife of a shaman, nothing less. So how did you manage to do that? Do you have to fight this, or do you have to plead and kneel down and ask, or is just like, no, I'm going to do it? How
No,
was it? How was it?
writing has always been like breathing to me. I've been writing since I was 10 years old. I was writing before I met him, and I continue to write. So for me, writing was my way of staying in touch with who I was and with my emotions, and trying to process the whole experience was always writing. So I would oftentimes go off by myself. We have beautiful gardens, and I would oftentimes go off by myself in the garden for an hour or so, and it was a kind of meditation slash contemplation. It's like journaling, but and so staying connected to myself through the writing. When I wrote the memoir, the reason I can remember so much detail isn't necessarily memory. I kept a journal. I wrote everything down. And so writing for me wasn't necessarily time away. It was integrative. I integrated it into my life, just like you would say, I sleep 8 hours a day or I eat 3 meals a day. For me, writing was a daily thing. He didn't oppose it because he just didn't. He saw it as a way of my spirit being able to grow. So that was fortunate for me. I've always kept writing. That's the way I've always processed my life.
No, thank you. So that's a great message to keep your purpose, keep your passion there, and not to just shove them under the carpet, as it at times
Yeah,
do.
but
Because
it's really important that I really think that everyone should journal. It's a time for yourself. So in order for you to stay connected to yourself, it doesn't even matter if it's 5 minutes a day. It doesn't even matter if it's 3 sentences or one paragraph. This is a tool I use with my retreat clients and with my executive clients, is always keep a journal. And if you don't know what to write, so this is a little tip. If you don't know what to write, you start by, like, as if you were writing yourself a letter. So, dear Alicia, today, blah, blah, blah,
right.
and I felt blah, blah. And all of a sudden, your inner voice starts writing for you.
Yeah.
And that's a really, I hope that your audience takes that tip away, because it is something that really does serve you.
Of course. Yeah. It's the moment when social media is not going, music is not going, the world is not going.
Quiet.
Quiet, quiet, going right. And now it's even more peaceful for you because you've settled in Portugal and you have put together all your journal notes, everything you remember, and you put it in order. And you're on your third book, if I understand well, and you managed to get those memories out. And some of the memories have caused a little bit of turmoil there, remembering, because every time we go back to the past, we re-experience those emotions. So how did you manage to keep the peace despite going back to the past?
At first, my writing mentor had said to me when I submitted a chapter to her, she said, your writing is good, but you're not in it. And I said, what do you mean I'm not in it? Of course I'm in it. I wrote it. And she said, no, you're emotionally distant. And she was right. So the very first part of that was too painful for me. And so I had to go through a kind of reflective process for myself. So I said to myself, how am I going to create the conditions for this thing that I want to create, this book? And that meant self-care. And what does that mean for me? For me, it meant to meditate every day. For me, it meant to walk on these beautiful cliffs that I live near. So taking time for myself and for my self-care really helped me get through the difficult times, and also getting support. The most difficult chapters I had, I went away to a retreat center by myself with my dog, and was complete no internet, no nothing. And the owner of the retreat center is a friend of mine, and she witnessed my writing, and that was just a really powerful thing for anyone who writes memoir, where you're writing the truth, and sometimes that can be painful. I really recommend you don't do it by yourself. Writing might seem like a solitary effort, but you want people around you who you can go to and witness you, and I think it's really important.
Wow, that's an interesting point of view. I've done quite a few writing courses a few years ago, like 7 or 8 years ago. And I don't remember being told have somebody there as well. That's a new point. Thank you so much for sharing that. And we're now wrapping to the last 10 minutes. Well, 9 minutes really. And I really would like some advice here because you're not just a best-selling author, you're a person who lived a life that completely changed and morphed several times. And here you are victorious all this life. You reclaim your power. You have your boundaries. So there will be lots of people listening and think, wow, I got the same problem here. I'm not married to a shaman, but my husband is very macho. Or maybe my children are, some of my clients, if I have children that are very possessive and they don't let their mom do anything. And they control her with their own way of, and so the mom is there, she's 50, she's 60, she's exhausted and she's stuck. So give us advice and tips and we will be so grateful.
The first thing I would say is understand where the messaging comes from. The message that women should put themselves at service of others before they serve themselves is a cultural message, and it's wrong, and it's patriarchal. So I'm going to be really blunt here. And it basically says, you have to serve someone else, otherwise you're being, and the word is selfish. And selfish, all that word means is self-care. It doesn't mean self-care at the expense of someone else, right? All it means is self-care. So the very first thing is forgive yourself, because those messages were taught to you since you were a little girl. And that's the environment that you've been living in. And that's why you feel guilty if you do something for yourself, like, oh, I'm going to take a day off and go to the beach. Oh no, but I have to do this, this, and that, right? So understand that
did you say
a day
off
or an hour off even?
Oh, day off.
I take a day off here now, but I've created a life to do that. But like it's any time off is seen as, that anything that you do for yourself can be seen as this word selfish. So get used to the word and look at it as self-care. The other thing is boundaries. Understand that you have requirements for your own well-being. If you don't eat well, if you don't sleep well, if you don't move, some form of exercise, if you don't have time for yourself, if you don't have a spiritual practice, and that could be religious or spiritual, all these things are what keep us whole and healthy. And you need to build boundaries and hold that as sacred space. And boundaries aren't meant to keep people out. Boundaries are meant to keep your wholeness intact. Very different way of looking at boundaries. I'm not trying to keep people out. I'm trying to keep myself intact. And in Spanish, and you'll see it in the book, there's a concept called amor propio. And it's a really fundamental principle in shamanism, but also in many spiritual traditions. Amor propio means self-love. And you can't love outside of yourself if you don't love yourself first, if you don't appreciate yourself first. You will not be able to give love outside of yourself where it's not an expense to you, unless you nurture your own amor propio, your own self-love.
Yeah, it's like Italian, amor proprio. It's also
amor propio.
Self-dignity as well, knowing that we deserve, just like everyone else, to have that
exactly.
love. And for those who have read the Bible, passing by, it says, thou shalt love thy neighbor as you love thyself, as you love yourself. So if you do not love yourself, how can you love others? You're gonna do the service out of guilt and not out of love, which the intention, guys, the intention makes a huge difference in a lot of ways, spiritual and physical, because our soul will be crushed because they're doing things we're supposed to do it. I'm expected to do it. That's my duty, but we're not doing it out of joy. And then we are resentful and frustrated, and then you go.
And it goes on. And then you wake up at 50 and you hate your life.
Yes. Yes. In fact, as I was saying in the pre-podcast chat with you, there was this PhD brain researcher called Lisa. I can never remember her name, but I will put links. And she was in the Huberman podcast, and she's all over the world. She's a New York bestseller. And she wrote maybe 2 or 3 books, and one is Brain Food, I think. And she talks about the brain because she got really interested. She's from a family of scientists, and she got really interested in the brain when she realized her grandmother had Alzheimer after being a degree holding person, really smart, and suddenly her mind after menopause just completely went. And this is typical to a lot of women. So she was studying how the brain works, and she said there are 3 stages where the brain of a woman develops differently from the others. So as teenagers, we all prune a lot of neurons as we are growing, so we can let go of all the stuff for children, we forget some memories, and we learn very more. That's fine. Well, I never knew that when a mom becomes a mom, so when she's pregnant, the hormonal changes are huge. We have estrogen levels that change. We have estrogen receptors in the brain. And when that one changes, the brain makes us women pregnant. Hear my English good really well today. We become extremely intuitive and able to understand this baby who can't talk for 1 or 2 years, cannot express anything, can he? We know we have a sixth sense, the intuition, il sesto senso in Italian. And with that, we are able to love and protect and be aware, have the gut feeling that something isn't right when nobody else gets it. And that's part of it. But interesting, every time we have a baby, we shed neurons. They never come back. Then we have more pregnancy, we shed more neurons. How do we get them out? That's interesting there, right? So we don't become stupid, we're shedding neurons. So what is this pruning going to do in our life? Then we go into menopause, which lasts 5 to 10 to 15 years. It's a long process. This makes us different. The brain changes again. We become more empathetic, more able to serve. And that's the time in our life when we prune so much automatically that we start asking, what is my purpose? Why am I here? And what the heck am I doing here?
What about me?
What about me? I exist. And so that's part of a physiological process of realizing who we are and we need to do something with our life. So I think that all goes beautifully with your being there. There are points in our life when we have something to do because we're married, we have children. So that's good to be focused on that. But then there is another stage when we realize, hold on a minute, now I come as well. And it's not to be feeling guilty about because I exist. I have interests and passions and I want to cultivate them. And I want to do sport. I want to relax. I want to stop. Instead of going, thinking that you're a failure unless the house is perfect and everything is done and you serve everyone else and then you're exhausted all the time and then people expect it.
Right.
To the point of criticizing and insulting unless you do it, which I hear from a lot of Southern women in Italy. The children use the mom like a domestic servant.
No.
And that's it. And then when she, even to the point of saying, give me the car keys to your 20-year-old daughter, she's like, no, you lost your car. It's gone. So this is where we need to set those boundaries. And as early as possible, but realize that we have to be kind and firm at the same time and understand that everybody should serve others. It is not a prerogative of women, and everyone should get a life and thrive and create the life that they want by using the mind, the soul, the gut sense, the intuition, and not just doing because society says or my peer says, and really listen to yourself and say, why am I doing this? That's it.
Exactly.
It's a question.
Yeah. We also at that age, women have this other thing called wisdom. And it is really wisdom, and wisdom is different than knowledge, and that knowledge is just information that I gather. Wisdom is knowing what to do with that information.
Yes.
And I think we become wiser and less we don't care about the outside, what people think about us as much.
I know, right? As you get a little bit more wiser, we don't get older, we get wiser. I'm very wise at 59.
Absolutely.
I will be a lot wiser when I'm 70. I might not look very nice, but I will be wiser. Why don't we trade? We are born cute and wise, and then we become stupid. That would be quite fun.
That's another way. Didn't they make a movie like that?
It did they make? Yeah, there was something.
Yeah. That the guy starts aging backwards.
Aging backward.
Brad Pitt was in it.
I'm gonna have. Do you know the title? I'm gonna have to watch.
I can't remember. I can't remember what it is, but I remember he aged backwards.
All right, I'll ask around in the house. Everyone knows everything about movies. I don't. So that was good. So you have a book. What was the title of your book?
The Shaman's Wife, A Mystical Journey of Surrender and Self-Discovery. And it's on Amazon now and other booksellers.
So it's already out?
It gets published on September 10th, 2024, but it's available for purchase now.
Wow, which is so exciting. So you guys, if you feel that you want to help Alicia in her journey towards a new life and help yourself with knowing through reading the experience, so a secondary experience and knowing how she went from this stage and how can you also morph yourself into a new life, maybe get the book. I'm not promoting, but I'm saying it sounds very good to me. So I'm not promoting.
No, I've gotten very good feedback from women. Ironically, many women have said to me, have emailed me and said, there was so much in your book that was similar to my life and I never told anyone. So it's really making an effect on women and make it understanding that we are all brave when we have to be.
Yes. Cathartic effect on you understanding and thinking, which also happens, when you hear other people, when you start writing down, when you go back and say, how did I live my life? So it's important to follow Alicia Rodriguez. She's also on Substack, as I found out. So
yes, nothing is ordinary.
Yeah.
The Substack is nothing is ordinary because to me, nothing is ordinary.
Absolutely. You have to look at life through new eyes and see what the potential is. Because you know what? A happy wife is a lot better than a resentful, frustrated wife. So make your wife happy by allowing her to have wings and fly where she needs to fly. Just like wife do with her kids and with her husband. Oh yeah, you do this. Well, wife too needs to fly and we all can fly together and create this amazing life. So thank you so much, Alicia. It's been such a great chat and so much great advice. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
All right, guys. So it's time to close this as usual. So thank you so much for being with us. Please click and share, subscribe. You know what to do. And I'll see you all next week with another great episode. Take care. Bye.
Bye.